Okay, Domfluff, you ready?
Yep.
Let me do this intro real quick. With its massive tank fleets and overwhelming numbers, the Cold War Soviet way of war really was a force to be reckoned with. But as I discovered after Combat Mission Cold War came out, there's much more to it than just using brute force. The Soviets in the 1980s are designed around a concept that's quite different from any other army in Combat Mission. So as I struggled to fully adapt to the Soviet way of war, I turned to Domfluff for help. He agreed to play a game against me as the Soviet army and show me the ropes, and as he kicked me up and down the map like a can of Michael Cola, I quickly realized that there's much more to Soviet doctrine than I had initially thought. So after our game, Domfluff sat down with me and explained the intricacies of Soviet doctrine and how to apply that in a run-of-the-mill combat mission battle. With his guidance, I now have the knowledge to start storming the Fulda Gap and come out a lot less embarrassed than I did before. So join us as Domfluff and I explore the world of Cold War warfare and learn the secrets of Soviet doctrine. Whether you're a seasoned veteran of Combat Mission or a newcomer to the series, I'm sure there's something to learn here for everyone. So Domfluff will be showing us what the Soviet bear can do in just a second, but I asked him to first explain to us what the absolute key principles are of Soviet doctrine.
It's mass and tempo are the two sort of core things to think about. Mass is essentially is what it sounds like. It's getting more firepower on target at one time. As in, if I'm going to do an attack, the attack needs to be full forced. Otherwise, it's going to die in pieces. So the other side is tempo. Tempo in this sense is very much in the chess sense of the term. Tempo in chess is basically a free turn. If I do something which is useful for me, which develops my position, and forces you to make a move that you don't want to make, then effectively you've lost a turn. So I've had one more turn than you have in the game. And since it's mostly symmetric, if I have more turns than you, then I have an advantage.
So why did the Soviets decide to rely on mass? After World War II, they didn't want to fight a war on their own land ever again, and so the Soviets developed a doctrine that focuses on going on the offensive. For this though, you need a much higher force ratio, and with the Warsaw Pact being such a multicultural, multilingual organization, a large conscription army that relied on mass rather than high levels of training made sense. So how does that work in an actual battle? Let's get our battle started, and over the course of our game, Domfluff will explain the 3 fundamentals that will help you Soviet your way to the Order of Lenin in Combat Mission. The map that we'll be fighting on is small and cramped, and it doesn't scream storming the Fulda Gap at all. But that's on purpose. It's a typical quick battle map, totally something that you can get presented in Combat Mission at random, and so it's excellent to see what Soviet doctrine would look like in a Combat Mission environment. Domfluff deploys behind this hill in the middle, and the only realistic avenues of approach that he has are right around the hill or left around it. My setup is that I have a platoon of M150 tow launchers in the back with good overviews of the map, a tank platoon spread out in the midfield, and in the front I've got 2 infantry platoons roughly divided between left and right. So the battle begins, and the first thing I see is a smokescreen coming down on my right flank. I'm not too worried though, as my Dragon teams have thermal sights and the Soviets don't. But perhaps it's all just a ruse, as the first Soviet BMP is then spotted coming around the corner on the left flank. A second BMP is taken out by my only M60 tank on this flank. And a third one takes up position in the tree line just in front of my infantry. From my perspective, this looks like a pretty good start, as I'm 2 for 3. But let's take a look at what's going on from Domfluff's point of view. When we look at his first turn of the game, we can clearly see that his troops have been divided into 3 groups, which touches on the first fundamental principle.
So this is the attack in echelons. 3 echelons. The initial echelon there is a BMP platoon, which are making up the Combat Reconnaissance Patrol, or CRP. Sometimes that CRP could have a single tank as well. I didn't bother in this case. But there are situations where you'd actually want to do that. And reconnaissance with tanks is very much a Soviet thing. So behind that is the Forward Security Element, or the FSC, which is basically a combined arms company. So it's a BMP company with a T-64 platoon. And then behind that is the Advance Guard main body, in this case another BMP company, and 2 T-64 platoons. Point being, 3 parts, and each part is supposed to be setting the conditions for the next part.
What is the task of the CRP? What were they doing here?
Their job is to find where the enemy is. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean recon by death. It doesn't necessarily mean roll down the road and get killed, but obviously that's a risk, and it can happen, as evidence here. But the primary thing here is find enemy positions and strength, and understand what the geometry of this area actually is. So the point of the CRP here is twofold, or the two things it manages to achieve. It manages to see where that tow launcher is, which is really important. It also manages to see where that tow launcher isn't, or rather where that tow launcher can't see. Because if you look very carefully from the tow launcher, there's a blocked line of sight where the woods in front of the objective manage to block your tow launcher's line of sight to the woods behind it, which means I have this entire covered approach I can go down. What that means is that obviously the CRP then is not going to go down this open area to the left of those. It's going to go down to the right of those trees where your tow launcher can't see it. At the same time, I've got a forward observer who is going to be setting up in a situation that you also can't see, I think, and start to call down the mortars on that tow position. And so what this is doing is it's shaping the conditions for the company to come at the cost of 1, 2, even 3 BMPs, and only 1, 2, or 3 BMPs.
Alright, so I thought that the opening of our battle had gone my way, having destroyed 2 out of 3 BMPs, but it appears as though Domfluff has gathered quite a bit of intel about me for his second echelon, the forward security element. Let's hop back into the battle and see what happens. Seemingly out of nowhere, 4 T-64s burst forward from the bushes and I'm in trouble. My tow launcher on this flank can't help since the enemy is using a covered approach and a dragon team with line of sight is suppressed by artillery that started falling this turn. To avoid the artillery that's falling on the middle objective, I move my tanks onto the backslope of this hill where the enemy can't see them. And when I spot some BMPs that start to advance, I maneuver them onto their flanks. Let's just pause it right there and see what Domfluff is doing.
So at this point, the forward security element is going in. Now their primary job, is to set the conditions for the main body. So really the point here is to skirmish and to fix your position. And so again, it's identifying your positions and it's fixing you in place. It's creating these. It's giving me a better picture of what's going on so that I can improve my main attack. Because that main attack has to succeed. If that main attack fails, I've lost the game, and that's just the dice roll. So I'm doing everything possible to try to smooth out that main attack, so that main attack can then have the best chance it has. So in context, the FSC here is skirmishing with infantry into there. I've got protection for my flank with that artillery, and what I'm trying to do is trying to have a base of fire such that I can defend the flank of the main body. At this point, we start noting you have an M60 on my flank, which you just moved up. This is where things will start getting a little bit dicey for the security element. And that's a problem. So that's an example of micro going wrong.
After hitting 2 BMPs with one shot, things become a bit too hot as my tanks are peppered with ADGMs, which are not going to miss forever. After that, Domfluff puts down an effective smokescreen with his vehicles protecting that flank, not allowing my M60s another flank attack.
And I'd like to point out again, my micro here was shocking. Mostly laziness, but also partly to prove a point that essentially it doesn't matter. The whole point of the centralization is that you've got a conscript army. They don't have to be good, right? You just have to be directed well and in the right place at the right time.
So here Domfluff touches on the next key principle, centralization, which is a fascinating principle. In the context of combat mission, centralization is looking at the entire battalion as one entity with one goal, as opposed to a Western battalion in which the companies can be performing different tasks. Yes, the Soviet battalion is cut up into 3 echelons during the attack, but all 3 are working on the same task towards the same goal in unison, because, of course, That's how you achieve mass. And for both mass and tempo, it's essential to have one centralized plan already and done before you click the end turn button on the first turn. Your plan is all preset before you go, exactly because that's what allows you to move mass at a high tempo under all circumstances. Now, that's not to say that the Soviet plan is inflexible and that it doesn't have options, because it does. But those options you have also already previously planned for, to ensure that no matter what happens, you know what to do next without missing a beat. To give an example, Domfluff already knows that if the FSC can take the first objective, the main body will just bypass it altogether. But if the FSC is struggling, the main body will assist it by attacking the objective in the flank and then move on. There's also a third course of action, where if the first echelons find all of my troops on the right flank, the main body will simply move over to the left.
But it's about the idea that if I can be a step ahead of you, or 2 steps ahead of you, or whatever the entire time, then I can force you to constantly react to me. And the only way to achieve that is by having an idea about what I'm doing, what I'm going to do next, and what I'm going to do after that. And having this constant plan where things push forward and push forward and push forward and push forward. And I already know everything has a role, everything has a place, and I know what they're trying to achieve, so that I know where I'm going and what I'm going to do. The problem with centralization, it's a way of making a mass mobilized conscript army do well. But the problem is that it does rely on the commander being good. And this is a huge difference, and it's putting a huge amount of weight on a small number of people, because if your commander's a genius, then you'll be great and everything will go completely well and everything's perfect. And the extent to which your commander is not a genius is how many people you lose, which is a lot of pressure, right?
So, like I said, Domfluff has pre-planned a couple of courses of action for his main force and will decide which one he'll take depending on what the first 2 echelons have found.
So the decision about the course of action is at this point, because I've identified, through dying BMPs, admittedly, but I've identified where 4 of your tanks are, 2 of your tow launchers are, and I've identified that most of these are to the left, which is exactly where I want them to be. I can take this base of fire, which was the plan, and engage to the left, which means I'm happy with my preferred course of action, which is the main body going up the right. The advanced guard main body is now lined up, so the tanks are in line. The reason why the tanks are in line is to maximize firepower.
And with that, we've come to the last core principle of Soviet doctrine, which is about the way they look at war and explains why the Soviets arrived at using mass.
The first thing is that you're approaching war as a science. It's very sort of mathematical and very sort of planned. Let's give it an arbitrary value to the M60. And let's say that an M60 has a 65% chance of winning a one-on-one confrontation with a T-64. Then the T-64 has a 35% chance of doing the same thing. So in this case, the M60 is about twice as good in a one-on-one situation. If in that same situation you had 3 T-64s against the one M60, then the chance of all 3 of the T-64s not seeing the M60 first works out to 27%, which means that there's a 73% chance that one of the T-64s will spot the M60 first and get the shot off. And it's that kind of thing where you're trying to push things in your favor by doing things in the sort of prescribed way, or setting the conditions in advance, mathematically or scientifically, that gives you that advantage just inherently. If they were staggered, if they were in like a platoon box formation or something similar, then you'd have some that would engage first and some that would engage later. It's like, no, you want to maximize firepower. You want to crest that hill with every single thing simultaneously, so that everybody at the same time gets a chance to spot, gets a chance to shoot, gets a chance to have an effect. This is absolutely key. You're trying to maximize your firepower and maximize your chance of having a success, which is what this is doing.
Back to our battle. My infantry platoon on the first objective appears to be facing at least a Soviet company, and so I'll have to pull them out. I expected that this would happen, so their battlefield taxis are parked nearby. I'm pulling them back to their secondary positions in these 3 lines. Then mortar rounds start falling around my tow vehicle, and I have no choice but to move it, meaning that it can no longer cover the flank where Domfluff is pushing. To make matters worse, out of the blue my M60 tank gets blown up by I'm not even sure what. until I start getting a spot on an enemy tank, and then another and another, and it's clear that Domfluff has opened the cage of the Soviet bear. One tank was hiding on the back of the hill now has a line of sight on the enemy's flanks, but it's soon blocked by the effect of Domfluff's artillery. And the same is true for a second M60. The only one to score a kill is a Dragon team that's able to see through all the dust with its thermal imager, but most tanks stay out of his line of sight. The Dragon team of the infantry that I had just pulled back a moment ago is now in a position to earn some fame and medals. But that opportunity too is cut short by Domfluff's artillery. All is not lost yet in this battle, but let's first take a look at the backbone of the Soviet army.
The Soviet army is primarily an artillery army. Typically with Soviet orders, you would have a primary objective, a secondary objective, and a line of further advance. And the nice thing about that structure is it means that you're forced to constantly think about what's next. Like you can never it's never a situation where you're static. Like I take this objective and then work out what to do means that you're going to waste time. Basically it's 3 moves if you like. And every move you make needs to be supported and enabled by artillery.
To support these moves, a Soviet player can use artillery to increase both mass and tempo. Increasing mass, meaning your numerical advantage relative to your opponent, can be done by using artillery to shape the battlefield.
You're trying to create engagements where you are shaping terrain with artillery and creating these local advantages, because you may well be in a situation where you're actually 1 for 1 in terms of pure numbers, but if we're 1 for 1 but the majority of your force is can't get through because they're stuck the other side of a channel that's being bombarded, then suddenly you're not 1 for 1 anymore because my entire force is currently attacking a single tank.
An example of this were my 2 M60s on the flank who couldn't get a shot off as the main body moved up. Of course I repositioned them, but their opportunity to attack the main body at its most vulnerable moment had already come and gone. Tempo on the other hand can be increased with artillery by denying the enemy the use of terrain features that you have determined would be bad news for you if the enemy were hiding there. The example in our match here was the tree line in which my Dragon Gunner was hiding.
It's a danger point, right? So it's supporting the maneuver. Again, that artillery didn't need to do anything. If it happens, it did, right? But all it needs to do is deny the terrain to you, or suppress someone that's there, or something. It's good enough for me to know that there can't be somebody there, because with artillery coming down, you can't have the dragons there. In this case, yeah, it dramatically shows the dragon dying as he's aiming, but it essentially didn't matter.
Wanting to support every move of your plan with artillery really highlights the need for the Soviets to make a detailed plan in advance.
The Soviets have long call-in times for artillery. The whole fires cycle is nowhere near as efficient as it is for the US. So artillery really has to be pre-planned. Either literally pre-planned, as in using the pre-planned tool, either putting down TRPs where you're going to want it, or just making sure that you know that you need to get an FO to a position where they can start putting fires down, so that when something gets to needing it, it's going to be coming in at that time.
Alright, back to our battle. Domfluff's main body is moving up here. What he doesn't know is that I've moved and hidden one of my M60s behind this hill. And with his finger on the trigger, the gunner patiently waits for Ivan to move into his crosshairs. So let's talk about what to do when you start taking some significant losses during your attack.
Obviously, I didn't know the tank was here, so the tank is a good position to start ambushing things and start, putting holes in T-64s, which is as they want to do. It is inevitable that you're going to take losses. You're going, especially in any attack, like moving is dangerous, and I have to move to win. The point is that I still have the tools to react to it, and I haven't completely abandoned my plan because I have a plan, because I have this whole thing sketched out in advance. So there isn't an option to abandon the plan. There is no course of action where I stop and rethink, because if I stop and rethink, I've lost. And I still might lose at this point. It's still entirely possible that I run into heavy defenses and everything falls apart. That's entirely possible. But I shouldn't lose because of one M60.
Well, let's see about that. The plateau in the far corner is Domfluff's second objective. Not in the sense of a game objective that earns you points, but in the sense that he has determined that taking it will outflank my entire defensive line and assist him in taking the town. To stop him from taking the plateau, I quickly rush an M60 into a hull down position. But although he bags 2 vehicles for the price of 1, he's taken out in that very same moment.
This is basically the decisive point of the battle, I think, because this is the battalion achieving really its main objective. The reason taking the corner of the map is that it's high ground and it's behind you. So suddenly you've got positions where you spread out defensively and you have all these positions and you're ready to go. And there are these ridge lines and you protect these ridge lines, you use them as hold down and whatever, all good stuff. But if I'm behind you, all that stuff is irrelevant. Because suddenly the lines of sight massively open up. Because all these places that you've used defensively are now open to me. And if I can get an entire battalion behind you, there's not a huge amount you can do about this. So, in a sense, it's key terrain, right? It's key terrain in the sense that this is the bit that unlocks your position. And this is why the deaths are worth it. This is why all this movement is happening. This is why I'm okay taking the losses, because I'm getting to that position. If I can get to that position, I have judged that is an advantageous position, and that means I can use that to leverage the last thing.
The last thing being the objective in the town itself. And I can confirm that the last thing was leveraged, as I was well outflanked and outmatched by this point. Watching Domfluff demonstrate Soviet doctrine almost makes it look easy, but some of my opponents will happily tell you about the times that they shot my entire main body to bits in turn 14 or so. So this video is not so much a guide to certain success, but a demonstration of a doctrine that was, in the end, despite all the efforts that go into stacking the odds in your favor, a dice roll. With the conviction that knowing how to stack those odds in your favor, as Domfluff has demonstrated, will help your Cold War Soviet endeavors in combat mission. A huge thank you from me to Domfluff, who spent a very respectable number of hours preparing this with me and sharing his knowledge. Some of the best stuff we discussed is not even in this video, so look forward to my next upload being more of a podcast where we go a lot more in depth on this topic. So if the CRP dies, why not just appoint a new platoon and say congratulations, you are now the CRP?
So the problem with that is that you start piecemealing. So if you send forward another platoon and also that platoon also dies, then suddenly you just end up dying by 1,000 cuts, and that takes time. So not only are you not massing, but you're also not tempoing, and you get none of your advantages. So you don't have